Hey everybody, I wanted to do a recording of lighting isometric scenes. So this is an absolutely gorgeous castle isometric set for D&D that, or any fantasy role-playing game that Drummo, the artist behind Epic Isometric, has put out. So one of the questions I got is how on earth do you do lighting? Whether you're using Photoshop or GIMP, the concepts are the same. You're going to be using different layers with different blending options. But depending on the blending options you use, you could really easily desaturate or reduce the contrast of the scene to the point where it's not playable. And readability of maps is super important if you can be playing a virtual tabletop tool role-playing game on them. So Drummer puts out all these colorized sets, and they're more than just palette swaps. He's going and messing with the colors and dropping in spell effects and other things to make them kind of neat. But it all starts with one of these base sort of, sepia-toned, colorized maps here. So I'm going to start with sort of this approach here, what he's got right here in this scene. I'm going to colorize it using Photoshop. You could just as easily use GIMP or another free tool, anything that can do blending options in various layers, so that you can do a little bit of non-destructive work while you're arranging the scene before flattening into a JPEG image to move over into your virtual tabletop tool. That's how I work. So let's do that. So here I am in Photoshop, and I've got all the layers and art and drawing pre-done, but I've got some minis for scale, just kind of figured out. The first thing you want to do after laying this out is you're going to want to establish where are the light sources in your scene going to be. So I've created, just by combining a couple of props, like a flame prop and a kind of sconce or whatever this is. It's like a cistern or something that a wizard looks into. I've created this torch here. You'll end up collecting props. I placed two of them in the scene, one here and one here. After that, I want some of the props in the scene to really pop. So what I did is I created a color layer. So I'm going to go and select that here. So I went with a brush, and I just painted these big, bright. So if I go and select my brush and make it smaller, and make it about that size, I went and created a new layer in here, and just using simple colors, I went and painted blue in that layer. Now to kind of keep in this wall hanging. Maybe if I was doing one of the trees here, I would pick a really bright green, and I would kind of do it in the tree layer. But then you'd ask, how do I get the edges really well done? How do I get that to look clean? Well, what I do for this layer that I'm coloring is I drop the opacity about 50%, and I zoom in, and now I can kind of trace. Now, really, I'm painting in full dark, full bright green. It's just I'm painting in a layer that's already half see-through, so that when I'm done, I can take the opacity and bring it all the way back up. And the next thing I want to do here is I want to apply a blending option, or really the blending mode, which is right here. I'll zoom in on that so you can see it. So here on the side layer, I want to mess with the blending mode. And there's lots of different options, from dissolve and darken and multiply and all that. But you eventually have to figure out how RGB works when you're working with Photoshop. So every pixel is a color. It has 3 colors in it, represented as a pixel: red, green, and blue. And when it blends the options, all it's doing is math between those different layers. So to multiply is basically going to take the bottom color and multiply it by the top color. The colors there are going to get multiplied. So you can make something brighter or darker by multiplying a white or a black color on top of it. And when you multiply a green color, all you're doing is affecting the green scale of the pixel, as opposed to the other colors. So it starts creating this overlay, and you can have blended different lights, different colors, and they'd all work independently because they're on different color channels. So for the color here, I'm just going to delete this because I don't need it. I already drew in the lighting for some of these other scenes. I'll move back to the full view here. So here, moving back out, I've got the blue colored in for these things on the wall, and then like whatever these mirrors, the skulls on top, I've done that. And then if I switch this over to multiply mode, now I've got multiply opacity 100%. There, I can still see all the black because, of course, 0 times anything is still going to be 0 for that multiply. So the blacks all shine through. If I just had that been a color and then opaque, it wouldn't have worked as well. So if I'd done normal and then made it sort of opacity and dropped it, you can see that like the blacks are getting washed out here, right? So this black here is not as is darker than this black here, and that's because I'm overlaying like paint on top of the black image. You don't want that. You want the multiply, because 0 times whatever the gray color is still going to be 0, and that's really what you're going for. So I'm going to move this back to 100%, move this to multiply. I kind of marked it here. So now I've got my props kind of colorized, to move the color into the correct color. Now the question is lighting. So what I did is I created this alternate lighting layer, and I started it at 80% opacity. I took a big brush. So I get into my brush layer, and I take the brush and I make it absolutely huge. And then I take the hardness and I take it all the way down, so it's a really soft brush. Let me show you the difference between those. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to hide this. So say it's a dark blue room. So I'm going to go to the colors. I'm going to pick out like a dark blue color. And then over here, instead of painting with a small brush, I paint with a huge brush that's really soft here. Now, well, that's too big. Let's make it smaller. All right, so I can paint with this small brush. Let's move the opacity to 80% so I can kind of see through it. And I can kind of colorize the scene here, or light it with this dark light here, right? To sort of like create the mood lighting all over. But as I make it bigger, you don't want a hard brush. So say if I was going to start painting in an alternate color like a purple, you don't want it too hard because then it just looks like a circle. So you want that brush to be really soft, so it looks like this faded thing. So maybe in that green grove down there, I've got some green light coming off the trees. Maybe these red lights, right, are going to be creating like some yellow light off of there. I want the brush to be bigger. Right? No, too small, too big. There you go. Yeah, going to create some yellow lights coming off of that, and maybe I don't know, just create some spooky stuff going on over here, right? So now, if I do change the blending options on this, my notes say to change it to hard light. Where is that? Hard light here kind of changes the lighting. So now it's changing both color but you can see, it's not making it too great. So I just messed around with the blending options till I found one that I like to sort of like tint on top of that. So I can still see the colorized props, but I'm also tinting the things here. And I mess with the colors and whatnot. So this is the actual run that I did. And I'll take this into hard light. Right, so trying to mimic some of the color schemes that I had from Dremel. I made the light thing being cast off from the torches red, and then I'm going to make the torches themselves yellow, and that's going to create kind of like an inner flame brightness look. So the last thing I did for the torches is I went and painted in a very bright yellow, and then so my notes say, move that to vivid light 100%. So I move that to vivid light, so it blends it in, normalizes it differently. So it's reacting with the red that's underneath it, so that's nice. So it looks like yellow inside a red, which is sort of a mini painting trick if you're painting minis with actual paints to make it look like light. So now here we go. We've got a light source that's going and creating this red glow around it. The minis are moving around. You can see that there's stuff on the wall, so maybe those are clues for the players. You want to colorize any props that are important for them to pick out. There's a little bit of green coming down from the bottom of the screen from maybe this grove that this castle's got inside of it. And it looks a lot spookier than it did when it was in black and white. And it just took a little bit of brushwork and a little bit of carving out these things. You could get into crazy detail if you wanted to, but just a little bit of colorization turns black and white castle, monotone castle into this neat spooky castle. And really quickly, if you zoomed out and you had that brush ready, you could just go and like spot out all the torches, turn them all red. You could do this pretty quickly if you wanted to take that extra step to make your scene made out of pre-made isometric artwork and kind of light it up. There are programs that do this. I've seen Arc-and-Forge and other virtual tabletop tools that have some of these really neat colored lightings, things built into them, and they're dynamic, so you can move the light. But if you're just going to bake the light into the background, of the JPEG and then put that as the background image, it works great. All right, folks, hope that helped out. And just to kind of zoom in again on the settings that I had. So here, the stepping through it, right? The base layer image I had as a color, and then I had the props coloring layer, which was on 100% to multiply. I had my lighting layer for kind of like the mood lighting and like the glow off of things. That was hard light, and it was 80%. And I tended to go dark. I mean, you have to blend it differently if this was a bright lit scene, possibly. And then when I got into the torch lighting layer, it was vivid light and 100% opacity.